Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us today. As you probably know, back earlier in the winter, Jessica and I went around to 4 locations, I believe, right, Jessica? And did an advances tour, and we had folks help us that were providers in the field, directors in the field, and some of you were unable to join any of those groups. So Jessica volunteered to do this virtual training. So thank you for participating. We appreciate what you all do for us. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
All right. So good morning. The tour that we did, they were day-long sessions. I do want to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions that they may have, especially those that weren't able to attend one of the in-person sessions. So all of the information that you see today, we will send this out to you. So please don't feel like you have to try and take screenshots or quickly get through, scribbling down information. I will send all this to you today after this meeting. So you'll have all of it. And because we have varying sizes of providers on this call today, what I'm going to do is kind of quickly go through first what I presented at the sessions in a more consolidated manner. And then I'll also show you some of the highlights of the PowerPoints from the other schools that showed their workflows and shared with the field. But again, I will send you all of these. And there are a few that I did not include today from the bigger schools. But on the System Office CCR website, under the Program Performance Advances tab, hopefully before the end of this week, we will load all of the Advances Tour documents and presentations there for you to go and look through. And I will send out an email to the field when that is uploaded. So you don't have to feel like you have to keep checking to see if it's there. I'll let you know once it's all uploaded. So from there, and I am more of a Teams person, so hopefully this is going to work. Okay, so a couple of pieces that I just like to go over. This is based on a lot of the tickets and incidents that we get. So the enrollment date and the NRS registration date in Advances often confuse folks. And they have these separate dates because Advances is a global system. It's not just used by North Carolina. In North Carolina, though, you are usually inputting the student's NRS registration information on the same day in which you're enrolling them into the program. So for us in North Carolina, the enrollment date 99.9% of the time is going to be the same as the NRS registration date. So if that has confused you, that is the answer to that question. So enrollment date, NRS registration date in North Carolina should be the same. All students in North Carolina must have an NRS registration. The secondary registration types are optional, depending on the different programs that a student is enrolling in. But for us, they all need to have an NRS registration because we are using Title II funds for those students that we are enrolling. So some states do not do it that way, but here in North Carolina, we do. So everybody gets an NRS registration, and the enrollment date and NRS registration date are same. So in the demographics section, you notice the ribbons. Again, I did not create this program. So when they're green, that means you still need to go through them to add additional information. And when they're red, that means that they are complete, which by now we've been in here almost a year for everybody, which will be May 15th. You've probably figured those out already, but if you do happen upon a record and you see one of these are green, you do want to click on it, scroll through, make sure all the necessary information is there, and then hit submit at the bottom and move forward so that they're read. Here's your NRS registration date. Always be careful that it does default to ABE, ASE. We get a lot of tickets where the contact type needs to be changed. So for those that are creating those NRS registrations, if you have new employees that start, that kind of thing, you want to have like a big sticky note that says, pay attention to this contact type. The contact type is solely related to the NRS assessment that the student is taking. It does not have anything to do with the class that you place them into. So often we'll get questions where the student is contact type ABE. They're using TABE 11, for example, TABE 11 reading as their NRS assessment. And then the provider wants to put the student into an ESL section. That is okay. You can do that. The student's contact type does not have to match the course for which you are enrolling them. The contact type is solely related to the NRS assessment type that the student is taking. And we recommend that if you have ESL students, keep them as ESL contact type. Use your ESL NRS assessments until the student has scored exit ESL, then change the contact type to ABE, ASE, and then begin testing them on your ABE, ASE, NRS assessments that you use at your institution. The exception with the ESL students when it comes to the ABE, NRS assessments is that we do allow you to record math NRS assessments when a student has an ESL contact type. So when you go, if a student is ESL contact type and you go to enter test scores, if you click start new battery, you will see that the option to add math scores, which are classified by NRS and Octave as ABE, ASE, you can add those. It's just the reading, writing, ones for ABE, ASE that you cannot add on the ESL contact type. So, the intake process does build this student snapshot bar. You do want to check that your ribbons are turning red. That means that you've completed that section. And you also want to look for the check marks on the student record. When the student has 12 hours and they become a participant, you'll get the green check mark. This is probably more important July and August, sometimes September, as we bring in new students that are continuing and they want you to double check the information for the new program year. These are required fields. Some of you may or may not have received an email from me that there were a few based on the import where they didn't have an employment status, but anything on the intake demographics that is red and has an asterisk, those are required to be entered on the student. It will create the red box around the approval check mark place when you go to approval pending if you do not have all these filled in. So you want to make sure that you've answered all of those questions. This is just on class placement. Let's see. You can add students to multiple classes when you first place them into a class. You don't have to, but it is an easier way to do it if they are enrolling into multiple sections. This is what I just went over. Your available assessments are determined by the contact type with which you give the student. But keep in mind, once you assign that contact type, when you're creating the NRS registration, if it's incorrect, you do have to put in a service now ticket for us to switch it over for you. So this usually comes into play when people have new staff members and you just have to kind of get in the habit of making sure that you're paying attention when you get to that screen. If you are a TABE school, we do want you to use the TABE import. We had a couple incidents with several incidents where folks are TABE schools. and they were not using the import, and then they decided to use the import. And then what happens is you have a lot of duplicated scores. But we do want everybody in North Carolina who does use TABE to utilize the TABE import. This also is going to save you time over manual entry, because you can test students today, tomorrow morning I go in and I can just approve those tests. So I don't have to have a person manually enter it and then have another person go and approve those entries. So it does save you a lot of time there. We do get the question a lot of times, will CASAs import? And the answer is no, it won't. It won't ever, because CASAs, the company that owns CASAs, also has a Title II software, and they don't want to share access to their system with basically a competitor, which would be ADVANSYS. So CASAs will not ever have this import feature, but we do have it for TABE. The sections down here you can edit. If you go to their program enrollment and you hit edit, that's where you can separate students and not have to use the auto separate feature. The other place that is helpful is if you have students who are going into Basic Skills Plus and you need to put their assessment information into their student master folder to show they were ASE low or ASE high when they entered into the Basic Skills Plus program. If you go to the Enter Test Scores tab at the top, you get pages of test scores, especially if the student's been with you for a while. If you go to, if you scroll down and you hit maximize on this assessment test report, it does give you a much more consolidated view of the students' pre and post tests over the course of their file. So that is, I prefer that view sometimes as opposed to having to scroll through several pages of assessments, but that's just a tip. Separating students, you may or may not have recently received an email yesterday about students that needed to be separated. The system does auto separate students on the 106th day of inactivity. However, what we have found is that it's not a perfect science. Especially in January when the ICR reports were due, we had a tremendous amount of tickets asking for students to be unseparated. And we did unseparate the students, but what we were starting to notice is that when we pulled the NRS registration reports, which is under the student management tab, you'll see students that had 150, 200, 300 days of inactivity. For those students, you want to go in and separate them yourself manually, because the system is not going to pick them up until June when we do a hard sweep of last day of activity. And then it's also throwing off like current enrollment numbers like that for you. So we do want you to go in, if you received a list of students, and manually separate them, because the list that we sent was for students who had exceeded over 120 days of inactivity. And so that'll clean up your records that way. Now, the separation reasons, and we want you to run this really weekly, bi-weekly, depending on the size of your institution. And we do encourage you to manually separate the students when you can. You can just rely on auto separation, but there are benefits to manually separating students when you know they're not coming back. And that is that you can run a report under supplemental reports as to separation reasons, and that will give you the data that may be helpful as to what is going on with your current retention of students. Are students leaving early? Are students meeting their goals and then leaving? Is it because a lot of them are entering into employment, and now they have a schedule conflict. So is there something that you could do differently there to, maybe switch student schedules or get them online so they can continue through until they meet their goals? The other thing that this does is if you separate a student when you know they're not going to return, then that student has exited the POP. If that student then enrolls in a Con Ed or curriculum program that counts for post-secondary enrollment, you'll be able to get the MSG for the Con Ed or curriculum enrollment. With colleague, we didn't have this option, so you had to rely on it to separate students after 90 days of inactivity. With ADVANSYS, you are able to end the POP ahead of that 90 days if you know the student is not going to return. So if a student has completed their HSE diploma or their AHS diploma or MPHSE, or the student has decided that they're going to move to a different state, that kind of thing, you can go ahead and separate them before the 90 days of inactivity. And then if the student does decide to enroll in Con Ed or curriculum, when we data match on the monthly flat file, you'll pick up that post-secondary enrollment MSG. Whereas if you're relying on auto separate, the enrollment to curriculum Con Ed may occur during that time that it looks like they're enrolled in the CCR, and then you don't get that credit. So again, with the approval of data, this is getting better. We're not at best, but we're better. You do want to have in your workflow a solid approval process, because it's very easy to let these get to the point where when you go to approvals pending, it's extremely overwhelming. And then and I know nobody gets to work in the morning is like, awesome, I get to do approvals today. I get that, but you don't want to let it back up to the point that it becomes so overwhelming that what you're doing is selecting all and then submitting. And we see where that happens sometimes, and we know it happens because then when it's time for closeout of classes, that institution will send in a tremendous amount of students that need to be unlocked or unseparated, or they need a change made because someone has approved it without really actually looking at it ahead of approving it. So we do not want you to have to get to the point where you're selecting all and just blanket approving stuff. So you do in your workflow want to have a really solid plan for those approvals. The entering EFL for the current POP is always in green. This is what I was talking about earlier, where if you don't have all the demographics filled out, then you'll get that red box around there. What I do is I right click on the student's name so that it doesn't exit out of this screen, and then it'll open a new tab and let you go ahead and update that record. And then you can just refresh this page instead of having to go all the way back through clicking. Some of the reports, one thing that I'll tell you when on any of our reports, and these are the ones that are usually under the actual reports tab, not so much with the supplemental reports, but with the reports tab, you'll notice that it defaults the state to North Carolina. It is especially important, especially if you are an institution that's on, closer to our border of North Carolina, that you change that default from North Carolina to all states. Because if you have students who have addresses that are outside of North Carolina, if you don't change it, it won't pick up those students on whatever report that you're running. So anytime in ADVANSYS where you can set the report parameters, if you see where it says state and then it says just North Carolina, always change those to all states. The testing alerts is a good one to use. I think most people are in the habit of using those now. You can export a lot of these reports that are under student management or class management. All of those do have that option to export to Excel. And when you do export it to Excel, you get a tremendous amount more of information as opposed to what you just see on this page within the screens and advances. So the NRS registered students who are missing attendance hours, this is a good one to use on the attendance alerts. A lot of schools are using that one, and we'll go over some other reports here in a minute too. The other one that I don't see as many folks using, but would be a good one, is students who you've created an NRS registration on. And maybe they attended a class, maybe they never attended, but if you go under student management and you select the enrollment alerts report, if they've attended, you'll see how many days ago it was. But if they never attended, like you just created the NRS registration, you'll have that NA. But this is a good one to pull weekly, bi-weekly, once a month, and find out quickly and their contact information of folks that signed up, but for whatever reason have not made it into a class. And when you export this to Excel, you get even more information, but you also get like an email column where you could just quickly copy and throw that into, you know, an email out to folks, letting them know of your next class date sessions, that kind of thing. So it's good for enrollment and recruiting purposes there. The NRS progress report, we don't really use that as much across the state, but if you do assign goals to students, this is a good one to look at. Students missing the entering EFL, this one is extremely important. This is under the student management tab. You can export this to Excel. You can also, before you export it to Excel, you can filter it down by only the students who have 12 approved hours. You could include students who have been separated, those with the provisional EFL. But you do want to run this weekly, maybe bi-weekly if you're smaller, but definitely you want to routinely run this to make sure that all of your students who have 12 or more hours have an entering EFL. If for whatever reason they have not taken an NRS assessment, then you're going to need to set the provisional EFL. But this is helpful also, especially if you are manually entering test scores. This is your kind of way in which you can catch any scores that may, for whatever reason, have not made it to the person who enters test scores, and that, you know, you need to go find that test and get it entered on the student. All right, so I'm gonna pause there for a second. I know that's a lot. Again, I'm going to send this to you, so please don't feel like you have to break your hand trying to scribble everything down. We will send this out to you. But are there any questions at this point?
Jessica.
Yep.
When you were talking about when a student exits out of the ESL CASAS test and we tape test them, what test did you say we could use for ESL students? As far as, yeah, the reading, math, language, did you say the math is acceptable?
So if the student is on an ESL NRS assessment, but you want to give them TABE math, you can record that score while the student is still post-testing on ESL assessments. It'll let you put it in under the inner test scores section if it's a NRS math assessment without changing the contact type.
Okay, but we can still test in language or reading as well.
Yeah, but you only really want to do that once they've scored exit ESL.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
So in looking at the attendance on today's sessions, I picked the PowerPoints from Richmond and the Lenore to kind of go through. And these are so the way that the in-person sessions worked is in the morning, we had the providers go through their workflow. And then in the afternoon, I went through what I just showed you guys and then gave folks the opportunity to ask questions and then also share what they are doing, from the participants that were there. We had them share any helpful tips and tricks as well. And for each session, I took a lot of notes and really made note of like best practices, that kind of thing. So what we're doing here at the state is a lot of times, especially when you have questions about things that relate to ADVANSYS, integration, and colleague, we always point you in the direction of the roadmap to production document. But that document's not been updated since June 15th. And we are slowly getting enhancements from the vendor for things that North Carolina needed due to our state reporting. And so some of those things like the census date, the check-in, check-out feature, capturing only scheduled class time, that kind of thing, like those things are now going into production. And so we're updating that document. But while we're updating that document, we are also incorporating a lot of the pieces that we picked up for helpful, ways to cut down on a lot of the time that you spend in the system, basically. So like, we wouldn't say we're at a best practices place because we're not even a year in with everybody on the system, but a better practices kind of thing. So we are going to get that out. I am hoping maybe mid-March, maybe sooner, but probably mid-March, we'll get that out to everybody. And the other thing that we are doing is we took the LEIS manual, which is the colleague manual. That's not been updated since May of 2018. 96% of that document is no longer relevant to what we do in CCR and what we do with colleague. So yesterday we finished going through the LEIS manual and extracting the pieces that are still needed. So we're going to combine that LEIS manual and the roadmap to production into one workbook that will be beneficial to you and your current staff. And then it'll be extremely beneficial to anyone when you hire new staff, because we do realize that trying to explain how the pieces work across ADVANSYS, Boomi, and colleague is difficult, and colleague itself is quite difficult. So hopefully this will provide them with the steps, much like the LEIS manual did, starting with, just looking up a student, but it will only pertain to the pieces of workflow that ADVANSYS, Boomi, and colleague impact, because we do have the ADVANSYS manual and the job aids under the yellow support tab, and so we don't want to add to that 300-page document. So this will be a smaller document, but it will relate to just things that integrate, basically. So with that, this is the presentation from Richmond. And so they went through their workflow from student intake all the way through to the reports that they use. So everybody has their intake a little bit differently across the state. So take from these presentations what you can and apply it. But we don't have a concrete, this is how you have to do it across the state for workflows. And I don't think that would even be possible just because of the size and scope and location of everybody across the state. So for Richmond though, they do have multiple counties, and their staff gives students reservations for orientation, and then if there's minors, they get that information out to folks. And then they have this workflow. Again, I'll send you these. But these are kind of the processes based on how the student wants to enroll into the program. So, and they've got up here, this applies to new students or any students who've stopped out and then want to return for another POP or in a new program year.
Hey, so, Jessica, are you, do you want to share your screen for what you're describing or not? Because I'm not seeing what you're talking about.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if anyone else is also experiencing that, but yes, I just noticed.
Oh, I got to click the share button. Can you see
there you go. Thank you.
Glad you said that. Everybody's probably, what in the world? All right. So here we go. This is what I was talking about. So with this, they have ABE, they have ASE. Their ASE is comprised of adult high school as well as HSE, and then they have their ESL students. They've got down here their enrollment schedule. And this is also something that they share across campus, so that if other areas get calls, they're able to provide some information instead of just saying like, oh, I don't know, you're going to have to call this number. So it keeps kind of like across the campus, everybody has an idea of what CCR does. So with their intake process, they do monthly orientations. They do theirs for 2 days or 2 evenings for a total of 8 hours. They do TABE on day 1, and TABE math on day 2. And during this time, the students completing their LEIS and registration forms, and students receive information on programs, class options, expectations. But they did say that they do have a big problem with people not showing up, because when future students call to inquire about the program, they do give them a day and time for which they need to come to orientation. So that's an area that they're trying to come up with a better solution for. So they do have the LEIS forms in duplicate, I think it was. I don't think they were triplicates, but they use the top one for the student master folder, and then the other ones go to additional staff. So that's kind of their LEIS process. This is their NRS assessments. Correctional students are doing the paper-based testing. And then students are placed in the class. So after that first day of orientation and the reading scores are evaluated, they look at the students' scheduling needs, program preferences, and they do encourage students to attend the face-to-face classes as opposed to just online whenever possible. They do have a pretty solid AHS program. And then they also have a lot of interest in those online classes, but they have seen a higher attrition rate with those, which I think across the state would probably hold true for CCR. So they do have for placement, in order for a student to go into one of their online offerings, they do need to have a TABE score of 519, and they do need to put in 12 hours of work a week. This is not a requirement for online enrollment. This is just what they do there. And then their online instructor is 100% remote, but does reach out to students for additional support, tutoring, and then just encouragement of class completion. And then this is kind of how they do registration and attendance. They gave the example of the spring orientation. They do ask that their instructors complete attendance and advances daily. I think this would be a best practice across the entire state. Unless there is a really good reason you really want to encourage your faculty to enter in their attendance daily. Because if they're holding it for, a week at a time, it's easier to make errors when you're trying to enter attendance into the system. So they do use a roster, like a one-page roster, to register students in the class on the first day of the class section. I think across the state, that's what most folks are doing. We definitely don't want you to use the LEIS forms as registration forms. One, that is a tremendous amount of work on the student, and two, it is not necessary, nor is it required. You really want to be using a one-page roster to register students on the first day of class. We really do not want you to have students filling out LEIS forms for each class section that they enroll to, because that is not the purpose of the LEIS forms. And students should only be filling out an LEIS form when they first enter your program, or if they stop out, so 90 plus days of inactivity, and then they return for a new POP. So it's only at the beginning of POPs that you're filling out LEIS forms. So at the end of the week, they get the actual backup documentation from the instructors for the state compliance folders of the student time. And then that then allows for that attendance verification to do the approval. So this is an example of their sign in, sign out sheet. This is their ADVANSYS data flow. So you've got the completion of registration roster. They submit the LEIS forms. Those go to a coordinator within 48 hours. That coordinator is then going to check for the completion and accuracy and initial. And then the students are registered within 48 hours of receiving that. And now the student should be in the class in ADVANSYS. Once that student's in the class in ADVANSYS, they do ask the instructor to enter that attendance daily after the end of each class session. And then the last class day of each week, that instructor needs to submit or scan and submit that sign in, sign out sheet so that it can be verified and approved each week against the sign in, sign out sheets. So they do ask that their instructors initiate retention efforts if the student's absent for 3 or more days without notice. And so they do have a good workflow in place to try to retain students. They are offering most of their day classes as membership, and then their online and evening classes with contact hour. With approvals, they really have a good process for this. Their data specialists, and then their part-time program support persons, they have 2 people. Those 2, if one enters, the other approves, and vice versa. And then their attendance hours are approved weekly. Attendance hours are the one, as you all are well aware, that can get really overwhelming and out of control quickly if you don't have a good approval workflow in place. And then they use the TABE import, and then they cross-check that with the scores on the LEIS. When they close a class, the coordinator initiates the class closeout. They do have a checklist. Richmond did share those with us, and I will put that on the section of the website. They also shared with us the sign in, sign out sheet. And so we'll put those up there. If it's something that you could use or you could modify for use or something like that, you are welcome to. Then their accountability specialist will enter the grades, separate students. Always remember too, when you're doing class closeout, let the class fully integrate the colleague, check FGRN, make sure all of the students' hours and grades are in FGRN. Then you go to ADVANSYS and close the class. If you close the class before integration has time to finalize moving all of the student information over to FGRN, then that's how you'll wind up with data missing when your registrar or whomever goes to verify the grades to close that class out in colleague. This was the checklist that they referenced in the other slide. I like this. It's it's kind of a good checks and balances, and it's a way in which you won't forget, you know, to tell somebody the different steps and things that they need to do. And it makes it go a lot smoother, I think. So their reports that they use and found to be the best for use with their program, they use the test alert report, the NRS student test report, and they do those at least weekly. This enhancement has been put in, but because it has to be done by the vendor, we are not able to program ADVANSYS like we could colleague. So we are solely relying on the vendor to make programming changes. But this has been put in as an enhancement request. So the class attendance reports, they check those periodically, and then they make sure they're, you know, full and accurate for class closeout for the state compliance folder. They utilize attendance alerts. They use the table 4 and 4B Excel analysis. They do that weekly. And then they use NCCCS to monitor their FTE. One thing that you probably know, but if you don't, you definitely need to know, we do not push attendance hours to colleague until they have been approved. So if you have a tremendous amount of attendance waiting to be approved, those hours are not in colleague. So if you run XCES or you look at FGRN for a class, and let's say we're 2 months into a class and we've only approved attendance for the first week of class. If I pull FGRN for that class, I'm only going to see the hours that were approved for that first week of class. So depending on the workflow across your institution, oftentimes if you have a registrar or another department that runs XCES for Con Ed to just kind of check and see where folks are, you may get an alarmed visit or phone call or email from someone who says, oh my goodness, last year compared to this year, why in the world is your FTE so low? And then that in turn usually results in a call to us. And it is because until it is approved, it does not exist. So you can have all kinds of attendance in ADVANSYS, but until you approve it, we do not push it to colleague. And then if you ask for us to unapprove attendance hours, you will see it come out of colleague on FGRN and XCES as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. But once it's approved, that's when we push it over. All right. So Richmond, I thought had a really good workflow. They had a really good presentation. They were kind enough to share a lot of their information with us. And again, we'll put that up on the website as well. Lenore also did a really good job with their presentation. And I'll go through this one quickly. So for them, it's also, you know, students call or complete an interest form. They are wanting to use Continued. We meet with the vendor now once a month. And I have asked several times about the dashboards because I get that question a lot. And the dashboards still, as of right now in this moment, do not reflect solely the 23-24 data. They are supposed to update in the next probably 2 weeks, but I'm not even going to publish that out there because I can't guarantee that. But in the last meeting last Friday, it should be about 2 weeks. And the reason for the delay is that ADVANSYS had Continued, which is the software that kind of stacks on top of ADVANSYS and allows students to fill out that LEIS form electronically. That came in our contracted package. And we looked at it and we said, yes, we would very much like to use Continued. And it would have been a simple thing to turn on and for us to utilize, except that we are unique in North Carolina, and where a student is shared across providers because it has, you know, the student has to be, if they're enrolled at Wake and at Johnston, then we as a state can only report that student one time. But a student, based on the proximity of a lot of our CBOs and community colleges and students, things like that, oftentimes we have a lot of providers that share students, or a student will start at Durham and then they'll go to Wake because they moved or that kind of thing. So we share students. And that was the reason that we had to get a Title II software program, because Colleague was unable to deduplicate these students across providers, because we have 58 different local versions of Colleague. Well, now we have one version of ADVANSYS, and that's good. That's what we're supposed to have. But because students are signing up to go to individual institutions, we had to then ask ADVANSYS to create 58 different continue-ed platforms, because we couldn't use the global system that they use in other states, because what would have happened is all of you guys would have received a list of any student across the state of North Carolina who utilized continue-ed to complete their LEIS forms. And that would have been a nightmare. And it wouldn't have been useful for us. So we did have to ask them to create 58 different continue-ed sites. That's why each of you has one specific to your institution. And from there, we had to ask them to create basically 58 unique dashboards, because what we want on the dashboard is a button for you to click that will show you quickly all of the students who've utilized continue-ed to complete their LEIS forms, whether you knew about it or not, which would allow you to put the application link on your website, even if you wanted to. Again, you don't even have to use continue-ed. But if you do, we want to make it as useful as possible. And so it's just taking a lot of time to create 58 different continue-ed platforms, and then basically 58 different dashboards within the ADVANSYS system, because they are two different softwares. So that's kind of where the delay is and why it takes so long. And that kind of, but we've been testing many of them, and hope in the next 2 weeks we'll release all of them out to production. So that's kind of where we are with that. So back to Lenore, they do schedule testing mornings and afternoons, and during testing is when the LEIS form is completed, and they have instructional assistants that then take that completed form and enter that into ADVANSYS. They do then schedule orientation at the time of testing. Then the tests are scanned and they complete page 4 of LEIS. And then those test scores are approved. They come over from DRC as well. So across the state, what I see is that most folks do have an orientation of some type. And during that orientation session is when students are completing the LEIS forms, and that's when they're completing their their NRS assessments. Lenore does use TABE, CASA's goals, and CASA's life and work for ESL. Their LEIS data coordinator does enter that on the day of placement testing, and then it's approved by their director. The post tests are entered as soon as the LEIS page 4 is given to the appropriate person to keep. And then test scores are approved by their data specialist and entered by an instructional assistant. So a lot of workflows there where you've got somebody entering and somebody approving. They do have instructional assistants that will enter any data from the LEIS form or NRS reg or make any changes based on college policy, and then the director approves any of those things done above. For Lenore, they also expect their instructors to enter that time daily, and then for if there was an exception that had to be made, it'd be no less than weekly. That's in compliance with our North Carolina NRS assessment manual, which does state for 23-24 that all data needs to be entered no less than weekly, and it needs to be approved no less than a week after entry into the system. So they also enter their proxy time weekly because of the reporting capabilities of their online software. And then there's their approval process for those entries. For prison, they get those timesheets at the end of the month, and then are able to approve time. So, for attendance entries, this was kind of their, tips and tricks process of downloading it to an Excel and then being able to check it, quickly against the timesheets for accuracy. And then that would then allow you to go back into advances, select all, and, approve that data. And again, we'll send you this here. General workflow. So once the students testing and student information have been entered, this is kind of like the build of the state compliance folders. And then they do give instructors a copy of the LAIS form without an SSN. And then the instructors also get copies of test information. Monthly, they do a report on who needs testing. And then they use the Excel analysis at least once a month. They do run their table 4 often and track any changes in students enrolled and MSG percentages. And then, and keep in mind too, with any of your federal reports, which goes for table 4 and 4B, if you have data that has been entered into advances, but it has not yet been approved, it does not exist. So you will not see that data on any of your federal reports until it's approved. And they do check for no pretests bi-weekly. And then in the past, they've tracked the MSGs by instructor. This is a question we get a lot too. And it's not available for this past year. In Power BI, you used to have the option to look at MSGs by course section and by faculty. And we are not able to do that with advances. The reason that we could do that with colleague is that, unbeknownst to me, even until I came to the system office, and really until I got on this project, the state is in charge of the programming and data backup and everything for colleague. So what happens at every institution every night is that there is like a ghost feed of your colleague data that comes back to the system office as like a backup strategy. And so, hold on. And so the reason that that happens is because the state has to back up the colleague data. ADVANSYS is a third-party vendor that we are contracted with. We don't get a nightly feed of the data entered in because they are actually in charge of maintaining our server, our backup servers and our backup data as part of the contract. So we don't get that from them because they don't have their system wide open for us to constantly pull that data. We do get the monthly flat file, but that's a specific report run and then sent to us through data warehouse. So that is why, that's a very long answer as to why you don't have that capability in Power BI anymore. And it's because based on our contract with the vendor, we can't ask them to give us a constant feed of data entered into their system. And so we are no longer able to publish those MSGs by instructor or by course section or that kind of thing. In a couple months, though, we will probably build more of an ad hoc report that we'll put in supplemental reports for you to pull that will allow you to do it from ADVANSYS, though. So that's something that we can do. It's just that it won't be in Power BI. All right, this is their IET coding. I see outcomes. All right, there's that one. And one last thing I'll share with y'all. I know y'all are like, oh my gosh. So I will share this with you guys too. This also came from Lenore. I really like this visual. This is their student enrollment process from intake through to graduation. And so this is just their more of a visual of how the workflow goes from the time that a student inquires about a program, goes through the program, and then gets to graduation. And so again, I'll share this with you guys. You can look at your current workflows and then kind of look at that against this and see if there's any areas where you could do modifications to make your current workflows more efficient and effective, so that it wasn't taking as much time. So, but we'll share that with you guys too. I just like the concise visual of it. So, all right. So from there, let me check. In advances, when you are approving a test, there are hours that show between the first test and the last test that show on the approval side. Can we trust those hours in reference to testing students? You can, and generally if you're testing in multiple subjects, so like let's say the student has a reading score and a math score and you're only post-testing on reading today. You'll notice once you enter in the reading NRS assessment and you approve it, that when you go look at the hours on the inner hours page, the reading one will have changed and the math one will still be calculating time from the time that the student originally took that math test. The one thing it does not count though is the hours that a student may have on the day they took an NRS assessment. So let's say I'm in class today, the 22nd of February, for 3 hours. And let's say I take an NRS assessment today, but I was also in class for 3 hours. Maybe I took the NRS assessment at 1 o'clock this afternoon and I had class from 9 to 1, and then I went to the assessment. It's not, that page is not going to calculate the 3 hours of class that I did today towards my next post test. So that's the only area. I think that's the only thing in check. Okay. So from here, if you have a question or, well, let's start with questions. So if you have a question, feel free to either unmute or you can raise your hand or what have you, or you can put it in the chat. And let's just go through questions first. And then the next thing I'm going to ask is, what are you doing at your institutions that you have found to be helpful, time savers, tips and tricks like that? Don't all talk at once. I think everybody's trying to take in all the information. All right, so if there are no questions, let's go through with those that are on the call and share with us either a report or a process that you have found to be really helpful as you navigate through to advances. Steve, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Honestly, what we found to be the most helpful thing for us is we made the transition, and I feel like we're still in the process of transitioning because we are continuing to find, you know, undiscovered little corners and things that we hadn't thought about yet. But honestly, it's to have regular communication and regular meetings with everyone involved. We've invested a lot of time in getting everyone together, you know, our data manager, our coordinators, and myself, and instructors when we need to really talk about it and really look at how we're handling things. That's been the most helpful for us.
That's a good one. Thank you.
Yeah.
And is there anything that in your workflow where you guys, when you're meeting, you're like, I really wish we could come up with a better solution for whatever?
The the thing that comes to mind for me immediately is just checking everything, doing the approvals. And that's something that I feel like there's got to be an easier way, but we haven't found it. We get we are thankful that our prisons are pretty close to campus. So we're able to get our sign-in sheets and that kind of information here on a weekly basis. We ask them to drop by and bring it on a weekly basis. So we're able to, and we pay them for time outside class to enter attendance and things like that. But I feel like surely there's a better way for us to do the approval thing, because it feels a little hard to devote time to it and energy to it. And I bet someone in the room has got a great solution.
Yes, we have seen several helpful solutions. I think especially with, I don't know if Lenore is on. Yeah, Hannah's on. I don't know what sign-in sheet you're using at Malin, but they use one where it's the student and it's by, basically their sign-in sheets mirror what it looks like to enter the attendance on ADVANSYS. And from a data entry and a data approval standpoint, when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. Because depending on what everyone is currently using, when I was at Johnston or I was at Wake, we had like a daily kind of print your name, time in, time out, sign your name kind of format. And so it was by day, but it was all the students. So then when you go to look at inner hours and ADVANSYS, it's not lined up like that. And so I really like theirs, because as an instructor or even as somebody that had to approve the attendance, it would go a lot faster.
I'd love to see that.
I wonder, Hannah, is there anything I missed on that?
Hey, Jess, this is Karen.
Oh, there's
Yeah. So I think, and I stole this from AB Tech. We'd always used monthly per individual student timesheets, but the process of downloading the time into Excel and then sorting it by student, then you have one sheet you're comparing to one sheet, which makes it much easier, to compare. And if you happen to have somebody distract you for a minute, I just check as I go so I know where I ended up. And so then you go back and it's pretty easy to check everything, and approve everything all at one time.
right. This is an example of your face-to-face one.
Right. And if we have both, we have some hybrid classes, we have a column on that sheet for online time, so that it's in your face when you're checking things that this student has online time. We better be sure that we're not double dipping.
Gotcha. So here's the example of their hybrid one. So you've got your time in, time out for your seated hours, and then there's the slot for the online hours, and then you have your total hours. So
the place for students' initials, we don't have them signed, but they initial every day.
So up here, you'd have the student's name. And really, when you lay this against either the class attendance report, or you lay this against even where you go to inner hours and ADVANSYS, this lines up so much better because it's got the actual class days. It's this student. You can enter all their time, move to the next student.
And the other thing I really, really like is at the end of the month, I match the totals per student against their monthly total, so that it's another double check that we've approved it properly.
Gotcha.
So
y'all have this formulated?
No, because this is students, they handwrite when they come in. But we do use your form to help us double check time.
Oh, the other calculator.
Yes.
can I ask a couple questions about this?
Sure.
So is compliance okay with just the initials?
Yes. I mean, we've never had an issue. I mean, we've used this for years.
Oh, okay. And then the instructor signs every student sheet at the bottom?
Yes.
Okay. And then also, so when the student comes in, there's like a clipboard or something with all the pages and they flip through and find their own?
They have notebooks. They have them in a 3-ring binder.
And they just flip through the pages
Yes.
and get it? Okay.
Yep.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like this with advances.
And this was probably, you know, Amanda worked at LCC at one time. So this is something that we were using when she worked with us.
She dinged us for not having, when the IDD students only wrote their first name and not their last. So that's why I was thinking that might be problematic.
We haven't had an issue with that.
Yeah, I think you have to have the signature or the initials.
Okay, thanks.
And Karen, would you share that? Because we do a daily time-in sheet, and I would love to see if we could implement that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Jess, will you send that out with
Sure.
the PowerPoints?
Yep.
That'll be easier.
I'll just include it in my email the other day.
Yeah. Thank you.
Who else either has something that they have found to be helpful or something with which they wish they could figure out a better solution?
Well, I can share. We started using the SharePoint site with attendance checks. So when the attendance is entered by the instructor, they mark it, and then the coordinator can check it, and then they mark it, and then it can be approved and so forth, which is helpful. But we have the hardest time getting people to upload their sign-in sheets so that it can be checked. And we have it so they could even, like, instructors can leave the prison and immediately take a picture on their phone and send it, but they just don't. And so I would love to have some suggestions on how to handle that.
Anybody have any suggestions?
Well, this is where I do not follow state policy, but for our prisons, because I had some issues and I would make corrections on copies and corrections wouldn't be made and I was spending forever, we just get them once a month and approve their time once a month, but we approve everybody else's weekly.
Okay.
It was the only way I could keep it accurate and not have to have a pile of ServiceNow tickets to make changes.
So why did you need ServiceNow tickets? Because you approved it before you had it in your hand?
If in order to do it weekly, if we were getting something and it wasn't right and they didn't do it and it got changed or we deleted it, although if we deleted it, we wouldn't need a ServiceNow ticket. But sometimes we found ourselves doing things 2 and 3 times because the instructor wasn't making the changes that went back on the copies.
So you were finding changes that needed to be changed on the sign-in sheets, not in...
Right, where they calculated time wrong, but then entered it into ADVANSYS.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have to be very careful because our instructors don't always calculate time very well.
Yeah.
Even given the tool that Jessica has provided for us. Unfortunately.
I think Jessica Hamilton asked, how often are they updating the attendance into advances from the Excel sign-in sheet? Is that daily?
Yeah, that's the expectation. I mean, is that they're supposed to do it daily. And then where we can walk to the classrooms or where the classrooms are on site. And we even have some instructors come once a week where we can approve their time weekly. The only people we're not approving weekly is at the prison.
Gotcha. So, and what Karen's referencing is this calculator. This is something we built at Johnson when we went to web attendance. So you can put any time in, time out. But this is helpful for like if it's 6:18 and then the student checks out at 9:22, it'll calculate, or let's say that's like 8:46, it goes ahead and calculates it out to the quarter hour for you. So this is helpful for classes where students just really don't all get there at the start time and they don't get there at the end time as much. So like it'll save your brain if you're having to constantly calculate time. So if anybody wants a copy of that, just let me know. I'm happy to send it to you.
I would like a copy of that. Why do you have so many rows though? You don't do it each time, you just have a list of the options?
So when I was like especially at Wake Tech, when you have a sign-in sheet that has 30, 40, 50 students on it, and you want to just be able to go quickly key what you're looking at on a piece of paper against this and then run down the row.
Oh, I see.
But I mean, you could, if you're only checking, let's say you had 5 students attend a 6 to 9 class and most of them put down 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, that's the easy 3. But then you have the one student who came in at 6:37 and they left at 7:42. You can put that in real quick and then it'll give you the one.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Let's see. Coastal Carolina, what questions do you guys have, or what is something helpful that you guys have found with advances?
Something that we implemented right recently at Coastal, well, not recently, but is to do a midway check of all the classes, pulling the, I think it's NCCCS that lists all the classes that has closed out or some that's going to be closed out. So halfway through the class, we go through all the attendance that we collected at this point and do a midway check. So that way, if anything was missed, we won't wait till the end, close to ICR to do the checking. We do it at least halfway through the class. So that way, if we have some errors in the beginning, the first few couple sheets of attendance, we can go ahead and get those fixed before, we get closer to the end of the class.
Gotcha.
But I do have a separate question. When it comes to the tape import match, I'm noticing that it's taken I'll say 48 hours instead of 24 for the information to port over. Is that something that's common, or is that that other people are having issues with, or is that something we should be worried about?
No, it's not something that you should worry about. Because it'll actually also look, I can't remember the exact number of days. It looks a lot of days in the past too for any test that it may not have picked up on. And that's because a student may start a test and not complete it and then come back and finish it. Or it may be that there was the name was misspelled either in DRC or in ADVANSYS, or there was an update, there was some sort of identifier to match, and then it'll say, oh, well, we didn't pick this one up, 14 days ago, but now all of a sudden there is a match. So it's constantly looking for these matches. It also depends on what time you're doing the testing. It depends on if you're doing computer-based testing and you're doing like a whole batch load. There's a lot of different factors. So 48 hours is not that uncommon.
The reason why I asked is I feel like it was becoming more frequent, and I didn't know if that was something I probably should submit a ticket about. But we are
y'all doing paper-based or computer-based?
computer.
And are y'all doing them in like a batch Sessions?
Right now we are doing a lot of post testing, but I started to see this trend before we started doing post testing.
Okay. It's probably just based on the settings of how you're doing the computer-based testing. Are y'all making tickets ahead of testing?
Yes.
Yeah, it's probably the tickets. So 48 hours is not uncommon.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now, if it exceeds that, then you'll put in a ticket and we can always double check. But the 48 hours, I wouldn't be concerned about.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Anybody from Vance Granville? Any questions or any tips or tricks that you guys have? Let's see. Roanoke Chuan. We pull the participation system. Alamance Community College, you guys have a really good system going on. Any tips or tricks you want to share with everybody? Jamie or Melba? Everybody's quiet today. Southwestern, Sarah, do y'all have anything that you guys have a question about or anything you want to share?
Off the top of my head, one thing that I think that we do really well in our program is our data coordinator. Every couple weeks or a month or so, we're a smaller college, but periodically she'll send out these like data reports. And they have like the reports linked, but she has like a nice visual and it shows like the percentage of students that are enrolled and the percentage that have under 12 hours and have POPs. And then she'll also send out like those reports, like the testing reports, who needs a post test. So everyone in our program, we're kind of scattered out, can see exactly how we're doing. And it's really nice. And one thing that I think we are struggling in right now is having our instructors as well, making sure they're turning their attendance reports in on time. We have a lot of off-campus sites, and sometimes it's hard for instructors to turn everything in if they have to, drive across county. So if anyone has any ideas about that or any extra ideas, I would love to hear that.
Do you have them like upload a picture or something to you? And like, I know a lot of folks, especially if you have part-time instructors, then it's easier to get the hard copies at the end of the month when they have to turn in their timesheet.
Mm-hmm.
But in the interim, do you have them send in a picture or anything like that ahead of time so you can do the approvals?
We don't require that. Some of our instructors do that just because it's a little bit easier, but that would be a good idea to have it required.
Yeah. Generally, you can get those timesheets when it's time to turn in timesheets. But ahead of that, I would probably try the getting them to send in a picture. You know, almost everybody has a smartphone, unless you're like me today, who has no service from AT&T.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you for sharing that.
Let's see, Karen, you had one other tip too.
Yeah, I found that limiting the length of my classes to 90 days prevented at the end of the class not having issues with students who have been separated and they weren't there to grade out, and having to just having issues with that. If we had 90 days, then they were there within the time. They would have been separated, and we usually have them graded out within the 15-day grace period, so that it prevents the issue of a student not showing up that actually was in class when you're trying to finally grade out the class.
Right, because oftentimes, and we see that a ton with the 16-week classes, is that along the way the student stopped out due to 90 days of inactivity. And then when it's time to grade the class out, in colleague, the student would still be there on the roster. With ADVANSYS, they're not, because the POP has ended. And so we get a lot of tickets that the student needs to be unseparated. So limiting the class time is a great suggestion. And then,
yes, that means we do two classes a semester where it is more paperwork. I'll admit that, but on the other end, it allows for efficiency in just getting people in and out. And we're running membership classes most of the time, or in a lot of cases, and that helps.
Yeah, it may be more paperwork, but if the workflow is efficient, it'll be less time spent having to put in tickets and things like that at the end. I did put in the chat the 2 timesheet templates from Lenore, as well as the calculator for time entries. I will include those though in the email as well, but if anybody wants to download them from the chat, I can just put them there as well. Are most of you guys running membership now?
No, Jessica, that's what I was going to add for Tri-County, and I think some of the smaller colleges can probably relate, but it's very difficult for us to run BSP membership classes. We do run a few, and we schedule them accordingly, but most of the time we're running lab classes because we've tried everything through the years, and because of our transportation issues and just the type of students that we have in our rural area. Generally speaking, if we set a start date and an end date, it just doesn't work. We have really, really small classes, and it's not the best use of my instructional time. So labs seem to work best for us, and that's what I was going to add to the conversation is what I would really like to have some support from the system office on how to do that most efficiently. Because as I said, Tri-County has tried everything through the years, even of course before I was director, and we've tried orientation set times, and we always come back to just take them when they walk through the door. We still go through the whole cycle, all the workflows for every student for orientation and career assessments and testing and all of that. I mean, every student still gets the same treatment and same processes, but it just is, we find that one-on-one for our area is what gets them to come back. It meets their schedule. So we're constantly trying to walk that line between efficiency and serving our students, when they're here, because if we just take them as they walk through the door and we sign them into a lab, And we're small enough to where we can do that. You know, we're average 6 to 8 students in a day coming through here. Now, some days it's more, obviously, some days it's less. So we can manage it with and we feel like it works best for us. But any support or advice or workflow for lab settings would be what I could benefit from. Because it works for us and we feel like we have a really strong program, but we're always open to suggestions.
Yeah, I just pulled up your Power BI numbers for period 7.
Mm-hmm.
Who else is on here that's a smaller school?
We run into some of the same things, Lee. Like in 2 of the counties we serve, we do well to have 4 students enrolled in the whole county, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally get what you're doing. We run a mix, you know, but our locations where we have low enrollment, it's either not serve them or do lab classes.
Yeah, what we run into is the whole scheduling issue. So of course you can't test your own students. Of course, you can't have overlaps with your instructors. So that's why we run labs, because it's easier. Easier is not the right word. It's the only way to make all the rules and regulations work and still meet our students' needs. And again, I feel like it works for our setting. We have a lot of students that come in scared to be here, as you all do. And just because we have this small setting, they feel at home and they come back, and we can eventually get them across whatever finish line they are trying to accomplish. But it does seem like it's kind of, I don't want to say inefficient, but some days when we have low student enrollment, it's kind of like, well, we're all here and you can't send them home on those days, my part-time folks, because what if somebody walks through the door? And
Right.
then you wouldn't have anyone to cover because those other folks are on other contracts and we can't overlap. So I kind of have to plan for my day, and it does seem to be, you know, a large amount of instructional time, but we have to have that instruction covered. So I don't know. As I said, I think it works for us, but some days it feels like we could be more efficient. So I would like to have any feedback on that you can provide.
Yeah, we can definitely set up a time to kind of look at the structure of students and that kind of thing.
We're scheduled for a technical assistance visit, so that's on my list to discuss and like just get any advice or any kind of workflows that anyone else is using or any advice they can give us. We've tried a lot of different combinations, and we always come back to this because we just have to be here and provide that instruction when students walk through the door. Because we're so small, membership would not work for us on those small class numbers. And we hate that because we're not getting the benefit of the hours for FTE like the bigger colleges get. You know, it's really helping them. And we're sort of feeling like we're lagging behind because we can't provide membership efficiently.
Yeah.
It would be really nice to have some additional funding or something to make up for that difference. I know we're talking about how we're going to be funded potentially. And I would just like that to be in the conversation, because for small schools, membership, you know, we'd have 1 or 2 students. I can't pay an instructor to be here. And we definitely don't want students to have to wait when they're ready to come in and get started on the next membership class. And we've even thought about running dual classes, but then we have to be so careful about overlap because we're so small. We don't have that many instructors. I don't have enough to assign to these different courses to not be overlapped.
How long do you run your courses for when you do run membership?
For our general labs, it is for the whole, for membership, we try to keep it to about 8 to 10 weeks because of the issues I've just explained when we have new students. But I've never ran a GED section in membership because we don't have that many students to level them out. You know, membership's going to have to be on level classes, and we don't have that many at the same level at the same time ready to start.
And y'all don't have a big ESL population.
No, and our ESL comes and goes. We'll have like a boom, and then we have 12 or 14 ESL students at one time in a lab, and then nobody for 2 or 3 weeks. And so again, we fall back to lab classes because it just makes that more functional. And I've even had some administrators say, well, send your part-time people home if nobody shows up. But that doesn't work because they could walk through the door at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, but if you had a part-time that was there and you're running membership, then you're guaranteed the FTE regardless of if the student shows up or not. But you may have to cut your contact hour classes down.
Well, we make it work. Our budget, I'm under budget this year. We make it work, but boy, my instructors are kind of stretched thin. But I have great ones, so I'm so thankful. They love what they do. Yeah, I'm open. I'm open to anything that we can think about. That we've tried to level the ESL, but the first membership class we were going to start was going to be in January, and they didn't show. So we're back to lab. It just seems like we keep falling back to just lab.
Yeah,
we didn't even build it because we didn't know if they were going to be here. So, and they weren't.
Well, I'll think about that, and then by the time that you get your TA visit, we'll come up with some.
Okay, well, we're still working on our workflows because we were one of the last waves, and so I appreciate everything that you all have shared today because we're still fine-tuning with our small staff what the best workflow is. So I appreciate all the information today. We're going to utilize it. We're going to steal it.
All right. So any other thoughts, any other questions about advances that you'd love to have answered? We do have some time still left in our scheduled allotment. Or any other best practices that you can think of that you'd like to share with everybody. I will tell you one thing that does help tremendously with the attendance piece is utilizing the check-in, check-out feature. And a couple weeks ago I don't know if you guys are on it, but there's it's left over from office hours. It's the Microsoft chat that was attached to those office hours that I used to do during the migration from colleague to ADVANSYS. Someone had posted in there a couple weeks ago about the check-in, check-out. So let's say I had a class that went from 6 to 9. If that student was checking in at 5:45 and checking out at 9:15, the check-in, check-out feature would give them 3.5 hours for a class that's only scheduled to run and an instructor is only paid for 3 hours. And that is not okay because for state board code, any hours of instruction that you count for a college towards FTE, you have to have someone paid for that time. So what is going into production? I'm hoping tonight, but at the very, very latest, it would be Sunday night for use on Monday, is that we've had Benchmark reprogram the check-in, check-out to only allow for students to have instructional hours during that scheduled class time. So it's no longer going to do that. So if you're not using the check-in, check-out feature, and again, there's 2 options with that. Either the instructor can check everybody in and check everybody out, or if you have a large class or a class where people don't come in really at the set time, they're kind of staggering in, then you can set it up to where the students check themselves in and they check themselves out. What happens when you use check-in, check-out is that the system automatically calculates to the quarter hour and puts that attendance on the student's record for that class. Then what you can do is on, let's say, Friday or the last class date, the last day that class meets for the week, you have the instructor send whoever does your approvals an email that says, hey, my time for 2-1 to 2-6 is accurate and complete, that tells the person who does approvals to go in on those dates and approve that time. That's going to cut down on the time it takes for instructors to key time. It's going to cut down on the amount of time it takes for you to double check that what was written down calculates to the quarter hour and then was entered correctly and then making corrections, that kind of thing. So that is a huge time saver. If you are not using it, you do want to use it, you're not sure how it all works. If you go to ADVANSYS, I'm becoming like a professional Zoom screen sharer now for this session. If you go to ADVANSYS, you go to support, you click downloads. We do have it's in the manual, but we also have a more simplified job aid of how do I use the student check-in module. And this is a simplified specific job aid as to how to utilize either of those two features. It's a 10-page document, but it has the screenshots. It's good to hand to teachers. It's good to hand to staff. And then you can utilize the check-in, check-out feature. Also with ContinuEd, we will have those report features on the dashboard soon. We do have a couple schools that utilize it, but then they have to make sure that they keep a list of the students who did it. That it's more like a controlled environment where they're having the students fill it out on laptops during orientation. Because right now, until I get the reports on the dashboard, you would have to go, you have to look up each student by their last name, or their social or what have you to pull up what they've filled out through ContinuEd. But that is also a big time saver because it's going to take what the student keys, push it to ADVANSYS and let you approve it without having to get a piece of paper and then manually enter it in as well. So those two features. And then if you're a TABE school, you definitely want to use the import because that's a time saver. So hopefully as the next month or so goes on, we'll be able to make those areas more efficient for everybody.
How many schools are using the check-in feature now?
I don't know the exact number. We do have a lot.
Like more than 10?
Yeah.
Okay.
Johnston Community College is a good one to reach out to. They've been using it since November of 23.
Is it working for most schools?
Yeah, the thing to keep in mind is when you first start using it, I always recommend that you have the teachers keep that paper sign-in, sign-out sheet just in case, because they've got to get into the habit of using it. And if a student, so on the class attendance report, what tells the auditor, the state compliance team who's coming, Amanda Toller's team, what lets her folks know that there's not a paper sign-in, sign-out sheet for that student that day is there's an asterisk on the class attendance report when the check-in, check-out was used. So if there's not an asterisk, then the compliance team is going to be looking for that paper sign-in, sign-out sheet to check the student's time in, time out. So for the first week or so, maybe 2 weeks, while your teacher's getting used to it, I usually recommend that they keep the paper and do the check-in, check-out feature just so they get into the habit of it. Because if they don't utilize it, and you don't have a paper sign-in, sign-out sheet with you, then you're going to lose time for that student on that day because they're not going to have a little asterisk next to their name. And then the other thing is I always tell folks, make sure your teachers do have some blank sign-in, sign-out sheets, just in case, let's say you get to class, everybody checks in, and then there's a power outage, or the internet goes down, or what have you. and now everybody can't check out. So then you just want a couple of those as like backup emergency things for days like today when AT&T goes down.
Thank you.
And I'll put in the chat, I'll put the how do I use the student check-in and check-out document that I just pulled out of ADVANSYS. And if you don't use the support tab within ADVANSYS, there are a ton of really great job aids and things in there that are really useful, and they're really useful to hand to staff and instructors, especially when that staff or instructor just has a very specific role that they play within the software. It's much better than saying, here's the whole manual. All right. So we got Steve. Let's see. Karen, you had your hand up. I'll go there first.
I had to unmute. Yeah, I've got 2 questions. For Continue Ed, do we have to print and put the LEIS form in their official folder?
Nope.
Okay. And we don't pre-register students. So if we're using time in, time out, the students won't be in there to check in and check out. So we'll still have to have timesheets. We'll still have to have paper timesheets.
Yeah, if you're not going to pre-reg, then you would have some sign in, sign out sheets from the beginning of class or on a student's first day when you're putting them on a roster, which is fine. You can have a mix within the compliance folder. That's not a problem. Or your other option is you can pre-reg if you want to.
Okay. All right. That was both of them. Thank you.
Steve?
Sure. Karen asked one of the questions I was asking, so I appreciate that. The other one is like, for those of you who are using the check-in and check-out feature, like what I'm envisioning is, okay, the teachers start, enters everyone who's in class, starts teaching, is delivering the lesson, and here comes the late student 15 minutes in. That the teacher would be frustrated having to stop instruction and enter that student. You know what I mean? Is
Right.
that what people are running into, or is that not the way it works?
So if you have a lot of students that are going to fall into that category, it would be really frustrating. And it would cause you to have to pause instruction. So for classes like that, let the students check themselves in and check themselves out, because you can put a tablet, a computer, a laptop, whatever by the door. They do get a 4-digit PIN that they put in to check themselves in and a 4-digit PIN to check themselves out, which cuts down on the possibility of people checking in their friends or things like that. And so that way it puts it on the student and it doesn't disrupt instruction.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If a student checked in but forgot to check out, would we have access to the 4-digit code to check them out, or how would that work?
The teacher can check them out.
Without a code?
Leah?
Okay.
You guys kind of answered some of the questions I have, because we're trying to implement using the check-in and check-out. But I guess my question is, for those who are using it, has it been more beneficial for the teacher to like start the process? Like us being new into it, should the teacher be the first ones to do the check-in and check-out? Do you think it would be more beneficial for us to start with the students doing it themselves, and then we can transition later? Like, I just want to know like the best method to try to dip our toe into starting using this method.
So during the transition from colleague to ADVANSYS for cohort 1B, I went and worked at Johnston, and the check-in, check-out feature was something that when I saw it, having been a provider for so long, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is like, we used to use a software called Red Canyon, and it would kind of do the same thing prior to web attendance. So I really wanted to see how that worked. It honestly comes down to your instructors, their level of their level of, I don't know how to put this, their level of interest in using it and their tech skills to use it. So, and then it also depends on, is this a lab class where you really do have students that are just coming in randomly? Because if that's the case, I'd start with the students. Because as long as you have a computer or a laptop that you can designate, towards the entrance, let them do it. It's pretty simple. The teacher is going to pull up a page and it's like a pop out, and then it lists the students on the roster. They pick their name, then a pop-up says enter your code. They punch in their code. Their code is their 2-digit birth month and their 2-digit birthday. So like my birthday is January 2nd, so my code would be 0102. And then that's the same concept for whenever they need to leave and check out. They just click their name and it pops up that code. So it's also not like they have access to the whole ADVANSYS system either. It's really just a very simplified screen, which all right, I'm in demo. I'll show you real quick. I had to be able to find a class that is in demo that is showing as one. So here's the ESL class. Well, I don't have any classes in this one group. So normally you can filter it by the first letter of the last name, or if it's not big, it would give you this list here. So
I guess in my head, I was thinking in the beginning that we would have them check in and then still have a time in and out sheet on the side that they would have to sign into too. But if the class attendance roster is marking that they have used this feature, then that wouldn't be necessary unless something went,
right.
wrong. So
here's a class that's currently in demo, but it looks like it's running now. So this one has students in it. So I can click on, so under class management, there's a student check-in option, or there's a check-in option. When you click that, it'll show you your classes that you could utilize right now. And if you're a teacher, it's even better because it's only going to show you the classes that you have.
Gotcha.
So from there, it's going to say, do you want to do staff mode or student mode? So if we go with staff mode, here's all my students. And then I can quickly just check them in. And then, the longest, you know. Okay. And so then that took it that way. And then if I go here, let's say I want to do student mode. Because I'm in demo, it's making me do A pen, this is our test site.
Jess, if I remember right, if somebody was not logged out after a certain amount of time, the system would log them out. Like a certain amount of time after class ended, the system would automatically log them out at
That's
the end
correct.
of class.
Yeah, so let's say the class ends at 9 p.m. and for whatever reason, nobody checked out. So we have a cron job within Advances like we have within Colleague. It usually runs around 2 a.m. So at 2 a.m., the system does a sweep and says, wait a minute, this is still open and it's a new day. And so it's going to log them out at 9 p.m. when the class ends. So it won't leave them open to acquire like 100 and some hours or whatever. So this is in the student check-in mode. And so I've got one student in this class, they can check in. I don't know this dude's birthday. So, but basically that's what it would,
Jessica, try 0101.
well, it took it based on the pin I just gave it. So it checked them in and then it checked them out. But it did it on like 1 minute so that the student won't get any time. But there we go. So, but that's I would put it on the teacher. So what we did at Johnston was with their ESL classes, they're really, really big, but they're really well attended. And so all of the students get there ahead of the class starting, especially the day class. So that class starts at 9. And so the teacher just went ahead and did it because 9 times out of 10, everybody who's going to be here for that, be there for that day is generally there by the time the class starts at 9. It was easier on the instructor just to click everybody in. But as you can see from the way it works, it's also not going to be a big pain to just put it on the students to do it themselves too.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yep.
On days when you have a substitute, would you need to just do paper sign-in?
I would. Unless it's going to be a long-term sub, and then you're going to need to add them to the class section so that they can add that. So if you add the person as a, like, let's say you're going to have a sub for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, go to the class section in Advances and add them as another instructor, and then they can utilize the check-in, check-out feature. If this is a sub that generally teaches for you and is familiar with it. Now, if it's someone who has no idea how to use Advances and yeah, I mean, then you got a way which is easier on everybody involved. Veronica?
Jessica, on Continue Ed, you're at Wilson. We use that in orientation. And one of the things I'm the data person, I find that when I pull it up, it continues to put a dash in the social security number, even though the students don't put it, because the facilitator for the orientation says she watches to make sure they don't put dashes, and the phone number too. Is that something unique for us that needs to be worked on, or what?
No, it's going on for everyone. So like then when you go to review it and then approve it, you're having to rekey it. But we do have an enhancement in with the vendor to get them to correct that, or a ticket in, whatever you want to call it. But we have a corrective action request in with the vendor. And that should be completed at the same time as my dashboard report update comes through, because that whole continuing piece is its own standalone software, and the programmer is trying to run everything that deals with that together on that batch run. All right, so we are right at time. But I do appreciate all of y'all taking the time today to join this session and to ask questions and to discuss things that are going well or things that, you know, need some assistance with the program. I know that we are all thankful that we are not still in the migration phase. So this does seem a lot more manageable at this point, but throughout the rest of this year, with the conferences and things that are coming up, my team will continue to do, a lot of presentations on, you know, streamlining workflows and, kind of tips and tricks. Cause now that we're out of the data migration, it's allowed us to have more time to kind of look at reports, look at the features, talk to folks in the field, that kind of thing. So hopefully as the year goes on, this will just get easier and easier. And honestly, then once you guys have it all down, we'll go ahead and switch colleague to Banner, and that'll be a fun project too. So, but that should be a couple years out. So, and hopefully by then we'll be more reliant on the ADVANSYS side of things than the colleague side of things. So with that though, if you need anything, always feel free to reach out, and we do appreciate your time and hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. And if you are an AT&T customer, I hope that you get service back soon. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for doing this.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.